Have you noticed how everyone is talking about Star Trek vis-a-vis its horniness lately? It's the topic of constant conversation on Trek Twitter, YouTubers who talk about Star Trek, like Jesse Gender and others, I'm guessing. I don't really pay attention. And also me, right now, have made videos about it, or are making videos about it, or will have made videos about it by the time you're watching this. Why is everyone suddenly so horny for how horny Star Trek is? Who's responsible for this? I blame Ensign Boimler's hologram. Brazenly presented genitals. This was a gag on an episode of Star Trek Lower Decks during the show's second season, and as soon as that episode was released, everyone lost their minds. No, I take that back. Everyone who was waiting for another thing about the current generation of Star Trek shows to get upset about lost their minds. Most people who saw it either thought it was funny or didn't give a shit one way or the other. Count me in that second camp. I kinda lost interest in Lower Decks during the second season, and I didn't think the naked Boimler gag was very funny, but I wasn't offended by it either because I'm not a fucking reactionary prude. A lot of the people who were throwing a tantrum over that bit were the same miserable dickheads who have been whining about everything the franchise has produced since Star Trek Discovery debuted in 2017. They're capital T true, capital F fans, the self-appointed arbiters of what is and isn't real Star Trek, and their complaints about the new stuff are endless and ever-increasing. But right near the top of that list is that they don't like how adult Star Trek is now. Too much cussin' and too much fuckin', except you shouldn't say fuckin' if you're a Star Trek character, because there ain't supposed to be no cussin'. We'll set the cussin' aside. This video ain't about the cussin'. It's about the fucking. Just as when I encounter fans who are upset over how woke present-day Star Trek is, when I see them complaining about how sexually suggestive and or explicit it is, I have to ask myself, what show have they been watching? Because, actually, Star Trek has always been horny. When examining the long-standing and deeply embedded horniness of Star Trek, that Boimler gag from Lower Decks is actually a good place to start. What is that gag doing there? Why did the writers of that particular episode decide to make that particular joke? Is it just a random bit of silliness tossed out to shock or surprise the audience? Did the writers include this unblushingly adult bit because they just don't understand Star Trek? No. In fact, it's a bit which demonstrates that the writers definitely do understand Star Trek. Like I said, I don't think this gag is particularly funny, but that doesn't mean it's a bad gag in theory. In its conception, it's a pretty solid Star Trek joke, which we can see when we examine it in context. The shot of naked Boimler showing off his wares in the mess hall occurs during a scene where Mariner is undergoing an evaluation on the holodeck. The premise of the episode is that the crew is being tested in miniature holodecks, where they are confronted with simulated situations inspired by things that have actually happened to other Starfleet crews. The simulation Mariner is in at this point in the episode has the entire crew of the Cerritos under the influence of the same substance that infected the classic Enterprise crew in The Naked Time and the TNG Enterprise crew in the ingeniously titled The Naked Now. The infection causes the loss of inhibition, which leads to everybody making time naked now. In other words, Naked Boimler is there to reference the fact that Star Trek has a history of this sort of thing. The joke only makes sense because Star Trek didn't just get horny. It's been horny all along. Granted, the infection depicted in The Naked Time is characterized as being like alcohol intoxication, and its effects are a lot more varied than makes you horny. In Sulu's case, it's more of a makes you swashbuckly deal. But when the TNG crew catches the bug in The Naked Now, significantly increased libido is definitely among the most common symptoms. It makes Beverly horny, it makes Picard horny, it makes Troy horny, it makes Tasha horny enough to fuck a robot. They're lucky Beverly finds a cure before Riker gets it, or else there wouldn't have been a soul left alive on that ship. There's been an undercurrent of sexual tension running through Star Trek from the very beginning. In The Man Trap, the first episode of Star Trek ever broadcast, the crew of the Enterprise encounters a shape-shifting salt vampire that gets close to its victims by changing its form into whatever will turn them on. We also learn that the salt vampire has been living with Dr. Crater on this planet, taking the form of his wife, Nancy, which it killed. Crater knows the creature isn't really his wife, but he's forgiven it and, it is implied, has been fulfilling all of its needs. What needs, you may ask? Crater tells Kirk that the creature needs love as much as it needs salt. So, to paraphrase Eddie Murphy, you gotta be a horny motherfucker to fuck a salt vampire that killed your wife. In the Corbomite maneuver, the 10th episode aired, but the second produced, Kirk complains to McCoy that Starfleet has assigned the beautiful Janice Rand to be his yeoman. What is Starfleet thinking, sending a gorgeous young woman to be my yeoman, he basically says. How am I ever supposed to get any work done? Don't they know how horny I am? Also, there's that whole entire episode where if Spock doesn't return to his home planet to fuck in time, he'll die. He spends the whole show so horny it makes him angry. The trend continues when Star Trek jumps to the big screen. Star Trek the Motion Picture ends with Commander Decker merging with the consciousness of Voyager because he really wants to fuck a robot that looks like his ex-girlfriend, who was apparently a walking aphrodisiac, by the way. Everybody complaining about how sexy the show is now. Did y'all miss this? When we get to the next generation, there are several episodes I could cite as examples of the horniness of that particular show, but then again, there's really only one, and I'm sure some of you are way ahead of me here. It's an episode from TNG's 7th season, and it's titled Sub Rosa. The Enterprise has traveled to the Caldos colony, or as I like to call it, the Scottish planet, because it looks like a 19th century Scottish village. And everyone who lives there is extremely Scottish, except the governor, who is extremely something else. Our heroes have come to Caldos because Dr. Crusher's grandmother, Felisa Howard, who lived here, has died, and now they've got to plant her. So Beverly says some nice words about her Nana during the graveside service, and then they start chucking dirt on her, except for this guy, Ronan, who places a flower on the coffin. Beverly and Deanna head over to Nana's house to start going through her stuff. Meanwhile, the governor of the colony says to Picard, "Hey, I know your ship is like the most important ship in the entire fleet, and it's kind of remarkable that you were able to arrange a layover for the entire crew because one person's grandma died, and I'm sure you've got other places you need to be, but do you think you could delay whatever your next mission is for a few days and fix our weather systems? There's a home-cooked meal in it for you. Authentic traditional Scottish cuisine. Well, we'll do it anyway." Beverly and Deanna are at Beverly's dead grandma's house, and they find a candle burning in an old lamp. They make small talk about Beverly's deceased relatives for a minute. Then Deanna's like, "You know how sometimes your friend is sad, so you say you'll go somewhere with them, even though you don't actually care at all?" Yes, that's what this is. I'll see you on the ship. Not long after Deanna leaves, this guy, Quint, arrives. He took care of the house for Nana, and he's the most Scottish guy ever. He blows out the candle and tells Beverly that if she knows what's good for her, she'll leave this place and never light that candle again because it's a curse that's brought the women of her family nothing but trouble. But Beverly's like, "Don't speak to me or my candle ever again." Later, back on the Enterprise, Beverly's talking to Picard about how hot and steamy her dead grandma's diary is. She's like, "Did you know that my 100-year-old Nana was getting absolutely railed on the regular by some dude in his 30s? And Picard's like, "I wish I still didn't." Beverly goes to her quarters. We see her in bed with her Nana's sex diary when something invisible moves her nightgown off her shoulder and whispers her name. And she wakes up, because that's the sort of thing that'll wake most folks up. We cut to Beverly and Deanna in 10 Forward, and Deanna's like, "So, how you doing?" And Beverly says, "I had the horniest dream of my life." Deanna's like, no shit. And Beverly says, yeah, I fell asleep reading this super hot section of my dead grandma's diary where she was really going into detail about all the stuff her and Ronan, her lover, did together. He was absolutely railing her. And last night, he was absolutely railing me. In your dream. Huh? Yeah, right. In my extremely physical, realistic, profoundly arousing dream. It's a good thing I never changed out the rubber sheets from when I used to share the bed with Wesley, I'll tell you that much. Right. So, because of how wet the dream made me. I got it. Later, Beverly is at her Nana's house when Ronan shows up. Invisible, but Beverly can hear his voice and feel him all touching on her. While he fingers her, Ronan gives Beverly a bit of backstory. He's a ghost. He was born in Scotland in the 17th century. He fell in love with a woman who was one of Beverly's ancestors, and he's been with her family ever since, moving from mother to daughter down through the centuries. And now it's Beverly's turn. So remember Quint? Well, the weather system on the colony has been acting weird, and Quint thinks it's because of the ghost. So he goes to the weather station and tries to destroy the equipment because he thinks that will stop the ghost for some reason. Data and Geordi show up and they're like, hey, knock that off. But then Quint gets zapped by green electricity, which kills him deader than Beverly's Nana. Beverly examines Quint's body and notices something troubling, so she goes back to her Nana's house and says, Ronan, are you here? I need to ask you some questions about killing Quint just now. First question, did you kill Quint just now? Ronan appears, in the flesh this time, and says, I've got a better idea. Why don't we go back to your quarters on the Enterprise and I can just absolutely rail you? Beverly's like, works for me. So she goes back to the Enterprise and lights that old candle, which, incidentally, is where Ronan lives and from which he draws his strength. Ronan appears in her quarters, takes her in his arms, and he's like, now I'm gonna rail you just like I railed your grandma. I know I keep saying rail because I think it's funny, but I want to be clear that it's very obvious Ronan is also performing a generous amount of oral sex on Beverly, as he presumably also did to her centenarian grandmother, nightly. And good for him. Get it, you ghost. Cut to Beverly and Picard in the transporter room, and Beverly's like, hey, I quit. I'm moving to Caldas to live in my dead Nana's house and get railed and eaten out by her boyfriend every day for the rest of my goddamn blissed out life. See ya! Picard meets with Deanna, says, so has Beverly been acting weird lately? And Deanna's like, well, yeah, but it's probably just because she's finally getting laid. And Picard's like, I don't like it. I'm gonna meet this new boyfriend. I bet he can't kick my ass. Picard drops in on Beverly being eaten out in a chair by her invisible ghost boyfriend. Awkward. But remember, Picard doesn't know that Ronan is an invisible ghost yet, so he thinks he's just walking in on Beverly masturbating. And why should he let that stop him? So he's like, hey, I came to meet your boyfriend. Where's your boyfriend? Is he taller than me? Beverly's like, jealousy doesn't suit you, Jean-Luc. And Picard's like, I'm not jealous, but is he? Picard tells Beverly that he thinks it's weird that no one other than her has ever seen Ronan. So Ronan takes corporeal form and comes walking down the stairs like, here I am, Captain. Just a normal, non-ghost kind of guy who knows how to make Beverly keen like a bloody banshee. Only for sex. Data contacts Picard and says, hey, we traced a radiation signature from whatever it was that killed Quint and found a bunch of it concentrated in Beverly's grandma's grave, so we were gonna dig her up and desecrate her corpse a little if that's okay. Picard's like, go ahead. But Ronan protests, saying, I'll go to the governor myself to stop you. Picard says, go ahead. I bet the governor's never even heard of you. I bet nobody here has any idea who... You are quite tall, though, aren't you? What are you, like 6'4"? Picard tries to pull Beverly away from Ronan, but when he takes her arm, he gets a shock of green electricity that knocks him out. Ronan runs off to stop them from exhuming Nana, and Beverly gets out her med kit and tends to Picard. She brings him around, and he's like, Beverly, I'm 5'10". It's a good height for a man. Too much taller, and it starts to get impractical. Beverly races to her Nana's grave just in time to see Ronan possessing Nana's dead body and zapping Data and Geordi with green electricity. Beverly's like, hey, knock it off. And Nana turns to her and says, Beverly, it's me, Nana. How weird, right? But Beverly's like, no way, Ronan, you can't fool me. Nana's dead, I remember. Ronan reappears and Beverly says, okay, first of all, there's no such thing as ghosts, so you must be an alien. The radiation we've been detecting is because you're an anaphasic life form, which means your molecular structure is unstable and you need to find an organic host in order to survive. After my Nana died, you were using the candle as a vessel until you could attach yourself to me so you could use me just like you've been using women in my family for generations. I thought you were a sexy sex ghost, but you're just an immortal deadbeat boyfriend. Beverly destroys the candle and Ronan's like, please don't do this, baby. We can work it out. I'll clean up more around the house. I'll get a job. Well, okay, I can't promise I'll get a job, but... And Beverly vaporizes him. That's a definitive breakup. So when I go through the story of the episode like that, I paraphrase most of the dialogue and I exaggerate certain things to make a point or for the sake of a laugh, but I just want to emphasize for the edification of those who object to how oversexed Star Trek has supposedly become lately, that there is a scene where Captain Picard walks in on Dr. Crusher getting fucked by a ghost. She's sitting in the chair, in a nightgown, writhing and moaning because she's getting fucked by a ghost. That scene is in the episode. I know what I'm talking about. I've watched it a bunch of times. This episode originally aired in January 1994, so even if Star Trek the original series wasn't horny as hell, which it totally was, how can anyone say that present-day Star Trek shows are too horny to be real Star Trek when Dr. Crusher was fucking a ghost on TV almost 30 years ago? Also, I know the credited writers of this episode are Brannon Braga, Jerry Taylor, and Gina Gallo, who gets a based on material by credit for writing the original spec script on which the story was based. But are we sure this wasn't a script somebody found at the bottom of a locked drawer in Gene Roddenberry's desk? Because it's set on a planet with a broad, simple theme, Scotland world. It's got a wacky premise. There's a ghost. And it's horny as hell. This is totally an original series episode, right? Speaking of Gene Roddenberry, you fans who are mad because you think Star Trek is too smutty nowadays, there's the guy you need to be mad at. Because while Star Trek has changed quite a bit over the years in terms of tone and aesthetic, it is still fundamentally the same show today that it was back in the 60s when this guy made it up. Gene Roddenberry was not a great writer, and at times was not such a great person either, but he made Star Trek political, he made it progressive, he made it diverse and inclusive, and by God, he made it horny. And if you're about to argue that, yeah, sure, Roddenberry made it horny, but he didn't make it this horny, let me remind you that Roddenberry wanted to make it way hornier than it wound up being. He just wasn't able to get away with it at the time. The dude wanted the Ferengi to have gigantic cocks and had to be talked out of it by the producers, who told him aliens who were obviously swinging serious pipe wouldn't be appropriate for a series the studio wanted to keep suitable for family viewing. By the way, isn't it telling that the thing about having huge dicks is the only Jewish stereotype the producers of TNG weren't okay with adding to the Ferengi? I told you they were anti-Semitic caricatures. I told you that! Anyway, Star Trek's habit of desperately humping the legs of its audience every chance it got continued after Roddenberry's death. On Deep Space Nine, there's the episode Fascination, where Loxana Troi goes through psychic menopause, which causes the crew to become randomly attracted to each other. There's also the ending of the episode Looking for Parmok in All the Wrong Places, where Worf and Dax come limping into the infirmary because they fucked so hard they broke each other's bones. And there's the fact that the series establishes that a Ferengi's ears are an erogenous zone, meaning that when a Ferengi touches their ears, they're basically jacking off, and we see them doing that all the time. We get to Voyager, which isn't nearly as sexed up as it could have been, see my recent video about shipping 7 of 9, but still has horn aplenty. The thing about Voyager is it tries to keep the horniness just out of direct view, in the margins. You can see it in your peripheral vision, but try to look right at it and it disappears. Like the Pleiades. Usually. There is 7 of 9, and her famously form-fitting costume, which legendary Trek writer and producer Ronald D. Moore once described as like having a naked woman just walking around. But apart from 7, we have things like... And then cut to the Captain Janeway and Tom Paris evolving into giant catfish and fucking in the middle of a swamp. Sexy. And having children who they immediately abandon to die. Not sexy. Q and Lady Q having Star Trek's first hardcore sex scene right there out in the open with everybody watching. Kinky. Harry Kim having an illicit affair with an alien girl, a girl so special she leads him to break all the rules. You know the rules. Never let her out of your sight. Never let your guard down. Never fall in love. Vorik dealing with Ponfar by trying to bang B'Elanna, eventually coming out of the blood fever after fighting B'Elanna because violence and sex are the same thing and Vulcans are way more fucked up than we usually think. Tuvok dealing with Ponfar by wrecking a hologram of his wife. Captain Janeway becoming infatuated with Michael Sullivan, a character in the Fairhaven holodeck program, a character so attractive, he leads Janeway to break all the rules. You know the rules. Never modify his program. Never delete his wife. Never fall in love. And so on. I probably don't need to tell you that Enterprise was perhaps the horniest series in the franchise up to that time. Not only was the sexy lady character elevated to the second lead, her costume was basically exactly like 7 of 9's, only with more of a pattern. Plus, the producers came up with a brilliant justification to get the cast semi-nude on a regular basis. When they return to the ship after away missions, they have to be decontaminated, which they do by rubbing disinfectant gel on each other in a room with sexy lighting. It's perfect and natural and doesn't come across as a cynical ploy to crowbar even more gratuitous TNA into the show. I think you get the point. Actually, chances are most of you who are watching this agree with me already, but if there are any of you who started out disagreeing with me, yet were open to having your minds changed, I think you get the point. Star Trek has been a horny show from the very beginning. The flashes of more sexually explicit content we've seen in the newer shows aren't departures from what the franchise had been up to that point. They're continuations of something that's been a part of Star Trek all along. The only difference is, because the current crop of shows are being produced for a streaming service instead of traditional broadcast or cable television, they aren't subject to the same standards that forced all the previous Trek shows to throttle it back to TV PG. Every Star Trek series has been as horny as it could get away with being. It's just that what the shows can get away with has changed. I think a lot of fans who complain about the newer Star Trek shows for being sexier or raunchier or having more profane dialogue or for being different from the older shows in any number of ways, really, are guilty of a kind of is-ought fallacy. Just because the older shows weren't sexually explicit doesn't mean that overt sexuality was omitted from Star Trek intentionally, and that any attempt to include it now is automatically a violation of the rules of how to do Star Trek. The older shows lacked explicit sexuality because that sort of thing wasn't allowed by their content standards. But just because they lacked explicit sexuality, that doesn't mean they lacked sexualized content of any kind. As I think I've demonstrated, the franchise has been varying degrees of sexually suggestive throughout its history. If you somehow never picked up on that, that's on you, not the producers of the current generation of shows. I mean, Jesus, do you honestly think that if Cinemax had approached Rick Berman and Brannon Braga in the 1990s and said, hey, we want a Star Trek series for After Dark, that they wouldn't have jumped at the chance? The first female captain would have been played by Shannon Tweed. Andrew Stevens would have been her first officer. The show would have been awful, but we all would have watched every single episode. Tell me I'm wrong, you hypocrites! Hey folks, hope you enjoyed this one. I'm going to let you know what the subject of the next Trek Actually video is gonna be, but before I do that, I want to give shoutouts to some of my newest Patreon patrons and channel members. First, the new patrons. They are Buck Ocean, thank you Buck. Christopher, thank you Christopher. Kevin Mitchell Reese, thank you Kevin. Touchstone 35, thank you Touchstone. ABCXYZ333, thank you ABCXYZ333. Hulbs, thank you Hulbs. Arnyat Arntzen, thank you Arnyat. Jennifer, thank you Jennifer. Charles Moreau, thank you Charles. Andrew Pfister, thank you Andrew. Frisky Jesus, thank you Frisky Jesus. Mike DeFilippo, thank you Mike. Bella Lugosi, thank you Bella. Michael Schmidt, thank you Michael. Nathan Warvey, thank you Nathan. Next, new channel members. They are James Gassick, thank you James, and Jesus Martinez, thank you Jesus. Those are the newest Patreon patrons to pledge $5 a month or more, and the newest channel members to join at the $5 a month tier or higher. If you want to support this channel, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives and pledging any amount from $1 a month on up, or clicking the join button to become a member of this channel. All patrons and members get access to exclusive posts that allow you to vote in the polls that determine upcoming Trek Actually topics, and also submit questions ahead of time for my twice monthly Ask Away live streams. If you pledge $5 a month or more on Patreon or become a member of the $5 a month tier or higher, you get a shout out at the end of a Trek Actually video. I could not do this without the support of my patrons and my members. So to all of you who support this channel with a monthly contribution, thank you so much for enabling me to have this wonderful job. Of course, if you want to support this channel with a one-time gift rather than a recurring monthly contribution, you're always more than welcome to do that through PayPal or Venmo. The links for those are in the video description. And once again, if you want to help out on a regular basis, please go to patreon.com/Steve Shives or just click the join button below the video. Many thanks. If you like what I do on YouTube, especially the Star Trek related stuff, you should also check out my side projects, the Ensign's Log, the Star Trek themed comedy podcast that I'm on alongside Jason Harding and Dana Cole. The three of us play characters who are low-ranking Starfleet officers. We are into our 4th season now, and our characters have jumped from the TOS era to the TNG era. Our show is a lot of fun to make, and judging by most of the comments we get, it's a lot of fun to listen to as well. If you're not listening, the links are in the description of this video. Please do check out the Ensign's Log. I think you'll really dig it. I also do a weekly watch-along live stream with Dana called Trek Reluctantly, where we watch episodes of Deep Space Nine, which Dana has never seen before, and another series or sometimes a movie that I have never seen before. We're into season 2 of DS9. We started out watching Firefly on the off weeks from DS9, and now we're watching the Netflix original animated series Hilda. So whenever you're able to join us, we invite you to queue up whatever we're watching on your end and watch along with us. It's every Wednesday starting at 6 p.m. Eastern on this channel right here. So if you're interested and able, please join us for Trek Reluctantly. We'd love to have you. Next month's Trek Actually topic, as chosen by my patrons and members, will take me back once again to my favorite corner of the Star Trek universe, Deep Space Nine. And I'll be visiting Deep Space Nine to examine one character in particular, a character who joined the crew in Season 3 as one of the good guys, only to ultimately, as Captain Sisko put it, betray his uniform. But did that betrayal make him one of the bad guys? Or something else? We'll try to find an answer as we explore the question, is Michael Eddington actually the hero of Deep Space Nine? That's next month. I'll see you then. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.